Everyone in that courtroom saw a criminal except the woman in the black robe. She saw the boy who once saved her from drowning. Judge Marissa Clay had seen thousands of defendants pass through her courtroom, some arrogant, some terrified, many numb. She had long ago learned to steel herself, to separate the gavel from the heart. But when the bailiff called the next case, her world quietly split open. The state of Louisiana versus Kellen Rhodes. A pause, a name that punched the breath from her chest. She looked up, expecting a stranger. What she saw made her grip the bench. 2 officers escorted the defendant forward, chains clinking against polished tile. He was tall, his posture heavy with defeat, beard scruffy, clothes wrinkled from holding. His hands were cuffed in front of him, wrists bruised, but his eyes, God, it's really him. Kellen Rhodes, not a name she had heard in over 2 decades, but one she would never forget, not when it belonged to the boy who once leaped into a creek to pull her from the water when she slipped off a log as a child. The boy who once tied her shoelaces before her piano recitals because her hands were shaking. The boy who, when they were 12, looked her in the eyes and promised, "I'll always come back for you." Now he stood in front of her in shackles, charged with robbery and assault, and she was the one holding his fate in her hands. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, keeping her voice steady, "you stand accused of aggravated assault, robbery, and resisting arrest. How do you plead?" Kellen didn't flinch. "Not guilty, Your Honor." He didn't blink, didn't smile, but for a fleeting second, their eyes locked, and she knew he recognized her too. "Very well," Judge Clay said. "Let's proceed." The courtroom around her faded into a blur of clicking pens and quiet coughs. Her mind wasn't here. It was in the backwoods of Pine Bluff, Louisiana, where she and Kellen grew up on opposite ends of a town that pretended to be united but was split by every streetlight and school zone. She had lived in a white-painted house with a wraparound porch, and a lawyer father who believed justice was only meant for a few. Kellen lived in a trailer on the edge of a soybean field, with a mother who worked double shifts at the parish hospital, and a father who disappeared before his first birthday. Their friendship had been lightning in a bottle, dangerous, bright, impossible to keep hidden. They met at the creek behind the old train depot. She was 10. He was 11. She slipped on the rocks, fell into the water. He pulled her out, and from that moment, she followed him everywhere. When her father found out she'd been skipping ballet to play catch in the fields with that Rhodes boy, the locks changed. Phone privileges disappeared. She wasn't allowed near the woods again, but it didn't stop her. For 2 more summers, they met in secret under trees, behind barns, inside the abandoned greenhouse behind the hardware store. He brought her comic books. She brought him chocolate milk cartons stolen from her school lunches. They talked about music, space, escape, and then one day, he was gone, moved without a word. She never saw him again, until now. The prosecutor, Rosa, tall, clean-shaven man named Carson Drew, known for building his cases like fortresses. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice clipped and rehearsed. "The man you see here today entered a convenience store on Elysian Fields Avenue, struck the clerk in the face, and stole $216 from the register. We have an eyewitness, we have a surveillance video, and we have the stolen cash found on his person." Marissa forced her attention to the file. Thin, too thin for what it claimed. Defense attorney Jada Lynn, barely 30, and already one of the most promising trial lawyers in the district, stood, her voice carried with conviction. "My client, Mr. Rhodes, did not commit this crime. The prosecution's evidence is circumstantial, the surveillance footage unclear, and the identification unreliable. We intend to prove not just that the state's case is weak but that it's dangerously so." The judge nodded. "Let's proceed." The first witness took the stand. Elijah Kent, the store clerk, a young man with a bandage above one brow, and a nervous tremor in his voice. He came in around 9:40, Elijah said, was wearing a hoodie, red, looked angry, argued about the price of a pack of smokes, then, boom punched the cashier, took the drawer's cash, and ran. "Did you see his face?" Jada asked during cross. "Not really." Hood was up. "You're under oath. Can you confirm with certainty that Mr. Rhodes is the man you saw?" Elijah hesitated. I don't know. I think it was him." No further questions. Next, the grainy surveillance video played for the court. The figure in the video was tall, wore a red hoodie, moved quickly. The footage was dim. The face never visible. The jury watched in silence, heads tilted, uncertain. Jada leaned into the moment. "Your Honor, The footage is inconclusive. It shows someone, not necessarily my client. Objection, Carson snapped. Defense is arguing during evidence review. Sustained, Marissa said, but even she was unconvinced. After a recess, the arresting officer took the stand. Deputy Eric Lang, a broad-shouldered man with a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. You found Mr. Rhodes where? Jada asked. 2 blocks south of the store. Walking fast. Was he wearing a red hoodie? No. He had a black jacket on. Did you recover a red hoodie? No, ma'am. Did you perform a canvas search to locate discarded clothing? We didn't have time. Did the cash found on him match marked bills? They weren't marked. So, let me get this straight. Jada paced, calm but piercing. You arrested my client based on location, not clothing, and took untraceable money as proof. Lang fidgeted. We had to make a call, not an investigation. Objection, Carson called. Sustained, Marissa said softly, but she wasn't sure she believed her own ruling. Court adjourned. For the day, Judge Clay remained seated long after the room cleared. She should have left. She should have walked back to her chambers, filed her notes, and gone home. But she didn't. She sat staring at the defense table where Kellen had sat. His shoulders square, his face calm, but his chains digging into his wrists like punishment for something larger than this crime. She remembered the last thing he ever said to her. The world ain't gonna save us, Riss, so we save each other. And now, she was the one supposed to save him. Not as a friend, not as a girl who once loved him, but as a judge, sworn to something that sometimes failed, the very people it claimed to protect. She exhaled slowly, hands clenched on the bench. Tomorrow would bring testimony. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments. But tonight, all she could think about was that boy in chains, and whether she still had the courage to do what was right. The courtroom felt heavier on the second day. It wasn't just the overcast skies pressing against the courthouse windows, or the anxious shuffle of jurors finding their seats. It was something deeper, something unspoken. Judge Marissa Clay stepped through the side door and took her place behind the bench. She kept her gaze steady, her hands folded over the gavel, but inside, her mind reeled. All night, she had wrestled with memories of Kellen Rhodes, the boy from the creek, the teenager the town cast out, and now the man facing judgment. He hadn't looked at her once, and maybe that was for the best, but part of her wanted him, too. Just one glance, just enough to know that under the robe and silence, she still remembered who he was. The bailiff called the court to order. Murmurs died. Jada Lynn, the defense attorney, stood with deliberate calm. Your Honor, she said, the defense would like to call our next witness, Officer Raymond Childs. Marissa arched a brow slightly. This wasn't in the morning's outline. Officer Childs took the stand, middle-aged, weathered from years on the force, but his voice was clear and confident. Jada approached him. Officer, you responded to the scene the night of the robbery. I did, he replied. Were you the arresting officer? No, that was Deputy Lang. I arrived shortly after the call. Jada paced slowly. You reviewed the area surrounding the convenience store, correct? Yes. Did you see anyone else in the area who matched the initial description? Yes. A man in a red hoodie moving east, away from the store. I notified dispatch, but no unit followed up. Lang had already detained Mr. Rhodes. Did that man ever become part of the investigation? Not that I know of. Jada let that hang in the air for a moment. Let me get this straight, she said. You saw someone wearing the exact clothing described by the store clerk, walking in the opposite direction from Mr. Rhodes, and no one followed up. Childs nodded slowly. That's correct. The jury shifted. Marissa's heartbeat spiked. Carson, Drew, the prosecutor, stood and frowned. Is it possible the person you saw wasn't involved? Anything's possible, Childs replied. But I found it unusual we didn't follow up. No further questions. When Childs stepped down, Jada glanced toward the bench briefly, then turned to the jury. The defense calls Kellen Rhodes to the stand. A hush swept the room. Defendants rarely testified. Marissa's stomach twisted. Kellen rose slowly. His shirt was too big at the shoulders, clearly borrowed from someone else. He didn't look afraid. He looked exhausted. He took the oath and sat. Mr. Rhodes, Jada began. Where were you on the night of the alleged robbery? I was leaving a friend's apartment a few blocks east of the store, he said, voice even. We watched the basketball game, and I left before 10. Who was that friend? Micah Daniels. We've known each other since high school. Why isn't Micah here? Kellen looked at the jury. Micah said he didn't want trouble. He's on parole. Didn't want to get dragged into something that might affect his own freedom. Jada's tone softened. Did you rob the store, Mr. Rhodes? No, he said without hesitation. I didn't even know a robbery happened until I was already cuffed. Why do you think they arrested you? He swallowed. Because I was walking in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong skin. Gasps stirred in the gallery. Marissa's breath caught. Did you have any stolen money on you? I had $60. My paycheck from the detailing job I started last week. Jada gave him a moment to breathe. Why did you decide to testify today, Kellen? Kellen turned back to the jury. Because I've spent my whole life being told to keep my head down, to not make waves, to just take what comes and stay quiet. But I didn't do this, and I'm tired of silence being my only way to survive. Jada nodded. No further questions. Carson Drew stood, stiff as a pole. Mr. Rhodes, he said, you've been arrested before, correct? Kellen's jaw tensed. Yes, for misdemeanor trespassing when I was 19, riding my bike through an abandoned rail yard. Carson clicked his pen. So, this isn't your first encounter with law enforcement? No, Kellen admitted. But it's the first time I've ever been in this kind of courtroom, and I never laid a hand on anyone. Carson pressed harder. Isn't it true you ran from the police when they tried to stop you? No, Kellen said flatly. They never gave me a chance to stop. The prosecutor frowned. No further questions. As Kellen stepped down, he paused near the defense table, looking down at the wood grain like it held some hidden meaning. Then he sat, shoulders square. Jada rose again for her closing argument. She walked slowly in front of the jury box, hands clasped. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a mystery case. It's a case of assumption. We've heard a lot of maybes and guesses. A red hoodie no one can produce. A grainy video with no face. A witness who couldn't identify the suspect. And yet, the state wants you to believe beyond reasonable doubt that my client is guilty. She turned toward Kellen. All Mr. Rhodes had was his voice. And after years of being silenced, he's chosen to use it. You don't have to believe he's perfect. You just have to believe he's telling the truth. Carson's rebuttal was shorter. The evidence might be imperfect, but justice requires us to follow reason, not emotion. When he sat, he didn't look confident. Marissa dismissed the court. For deliberation. The jury left the room. And for hours, the building held its breath. Kellen sat alone at the defense table, staring ahead. UNMOVING.JADA, flipped through notes she didn't need to read. Marissa Clay remained in her chambers, pacing. She looked at the framed quote hanging behind her desk, one she'd clung to since law school. Justice is not a mirror. It is a light. She wasn't sure she believed it anymore. At 4:16 p.m., the knock came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again. Reporters, locals, strangers, who heard there was a black man on trial for something thin. Marissa returned to the bench. Kellen stood as the foreperson read the verdict. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus Kellen Rhodes, we find the defendant not guilty. The silence was louder than any shout, then a gasp, a sob, and clapping that was quickly hushed. Marissa banged the gavel. Order. Kellen's legs almost gave. Jada grabbed his arm to steady him. You're free to go, Mr. Rhodes, Marissa said, her voice steady but her heart trembling. As the crowd cleared, Marissa remained behind. Kellen approached slowly, not as a defendant, not as a stranger, as something else entirely. He stopped just below the bench, eyes steady. I wondered, he said, all trial, if you remembered me. I did, she said, from the first moment you walked in. Why didn't you say anything? I couldn't, she said. If I had, it might have cost you the case. Kellen looked away for a moment. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. I know. A pause. You were the only person who ever looked at me like I wasn't already guilty, he said, back then, and I failed you. No, Kellen said, shaking his head. The system failed me. You just work in it. Marissa stepped down from the bench, something she rarely did. She stood in front of him, face to face now. No robe, no bench. Just Marissa and Kellen. I don't want to be just another cog in a system that only works when it wants to, she said. Then don't, he replied. Another pause. Then, with the faintest smile, he added, you still talk too much when you're nervous. She laughed, tears brimming. And you still act like you've got nothing to lose. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. I'm staying in the city a while, he said over his shoulder. Try to get things together. If you ever want to talk. I do, she said immediately. He gave her a small nod. Then he was gone. Judge Marissa Clay stood in her empty courtroom, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel powerless. She felt responsible, and that meant she could still make a difference.